Tanks in HOI4. Are tanks in HOI4 actually important, or are they a waste of time, and should you not make them? Well, I don't think anybody's really talked about it. Well, maybe, but the actual case of, are tanks actually really needed in HOI4? And I think there's really no true answer, because truly it really matters on the context. So I'll go based off of two contexts here. We'll say single player and multiplayer. Now, in single player, you might make tanks. You probably don't need to, though. But if you make tanks in single player, you'll probably, most of the time, I mean, at least most people do medium tanks. I feel like that's pretty universal. Heavy tanks is also an option. But if we're talking about meta, then I'd say medium is probably more popular. But we're not even going to talk about light tanks. But in single player, you're probably just going to do like whatever, like a basic medium tank design. But are they actually needed in single player? Can you just skip out on tanks? Do I need to make a tank design? Do I need to actually produce tanks in single player? Well, no, and also maybe, because then again, it really matters on what are you doing in the game. But most of the time, probably not, unless you're playing with like an AI mod, or I don't know, if you would just want to have fun with tanks, then probably not. You could honestly just go with making a infantry template, a heavy infantry, doing, say, like, what, 30 with? I mean, that's still meta. If you like do infantry and no tanks, something like this, 36 to 30 with, I mean, this is fine. But when we switch it to multiplayer, and we, think about multiplayer, then it's a little, yeah. I mean, here's the thing. Most of the time in multiplayer, you definitely are going to be doing tanks, because other people are doing tanks. So you need to combat, the other player's tanks. But do you really need to make tanks to defeat other tanks? No, you can use AT in your divisions, your infantry divisions, if you're heavy, because you would have to make heavy infantry. But if you don't make tanks, then I'd say just use AT in multiplayer. I'm talking about multiplayer, because single player, who gives a shit about single player? You can do whatever you want. You really don't need to do tanks in single player. It's still fun to do, and you probably still should. But multiplayer, if you don't do tanks, then you have to have AT. You have to, or else it's going to be very, very annoying to fight tanks, and probably even close to not even possible, especially if they do 36 with. And even then, it's like, AT's good, but like, compared to tanks and tank divisions you make with tank designs, tanks are always going to perform better than infantry. Always. Unless somehow you make an ass tank template, most of the time tanks are going to dominate. But if you do infantry, like I said, you have to do AT. Maybe you can put Space Marines in there, maybe. But what if we just say absolutely no tanks? So no like light tanks, no recon. Then yeah, you'll probably have to make heavy infantry with AT, anti-air, maybe recon, but recon's not really popular. It used to be. Support artillery, and it kind of depends. There's a lot you can do. Logistics. Um, you could have really whatever. I mean, as long as it isn't too weird. But I feel like if we're talking about multiplayer, and are tanks really important in multiplayer, I would say yeah, you probably want to do them. But in some cases, you actually might not need to, or you can actually go without if you just research these things for your infantry if you actually need these things. Like you might not need a field hospital if you're like the Soviet Union. But logistics, I say yes, definitely logistics. Signal, signal you would put in like a tank division. So I think it really comes down to the role you're also playing. In defense, like if you're playing a defensive nation, like let's say we're doing a World War II game, multiplayer game, and you're playing France, and yeah, I probably say you don't need to. You probably would not do tanks, and you could just make good infantry that has what is it, anti tank, and also anti air, and then you make your airplanes fit the need for whatever. Like if you're playing defense, okay, defensive plane designs, offensive plane designs to support. If you're on the offensive, your tanks. Because usually the thing is, if you're like, let's say we're playing Germany MP game, you probably will do tanks. I've never seen somebody play Germany and not use tanks in like a multiplayer game. But if if they don't, that's surprising. If you don't use tanks, and like I said, you'll have to do AT, because the thing is, like, we're talking about MP, and people are going to use 36 with tanks. That's a guaranteed thing that's going to happen. So you have to have heavy AT, and you have to have planes. That's another thing, because planes, see, it doesn't all just matter about tanks and stuff. Because really, the thing that matters in HOI4 is air. Because if you don't have air, then your tanks are not going to win. So then we can actually flip the script and say, okay, tanks aren't really needed. What's actually really needed are planes. You don't need to have tanks unless you're like really doing some offensive stuff. Then yeah, but most of the time you will use tanks. But do you really need to use tanks all the time? No, you can just use heavy 36 width infantry that have AT, or use mountaineers, or do any of that. But really, if you have the air superiority and you have good enough cast designs, then yes, you probably might be fine with heavy infantry. I can't say it's a guarantee, because it really depends on what you make, what templates you make, and what plane designs. But most of the time, if you get air superiority and you're using heavy infantry and there's like 36 with tanks you're fighting, yeah, you probably will be able to deal with them, depending on what you do and how you do it. Yeah, you probably can. But I think this is kind of an important thing to talk about, because I feel like a lot of people think they need to make tanks in this game when you really don't. Like, I used to not make tanks at all, and I was perfectly fine. But you have to do heavy infantry. You have to. So I think in the next video, I'll show some things that things that you should not do in your templates, because there's a lot of like weird stuff you'll see, especially if you're in like the HOI4 Discord. Some weird ass shit that they make in there with their templates. But yeah, I think that's about it. In conclusion, no and yes, but I'm leaning towards no. Tanks are not like really needed or important. I'd say no, but it's how you play your cards and the context we're in. But you don't need tanks, and they're not important depending on what we're doing, if that makes any sense. Like, they're not important to have in multiplayer if you're doing heavy infantry. Then they're not, I guess, needed or wanted. But then again, your heavy infantry have to be good, and they have to be able to fight tanks. Or else then, tanks are very important, because then you can't fight other tanks. But yeah, I think that's about it. Thank you for watching, and in Luna we trust.